Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to create an interactive dashboard using your own data, and of course we'll use pivot tables and slicers to do that. And if you're not familiar with the concept of a dashboard takes data, sometimes from many different places, and it displays summaries of that data in a very easy visual format. Oftentimes it uses graphs and charts, as you can see on the screen here. Well, let me go ahead and show you what we're going to be creating over the next few minutes here. So this is the dashboard that we're going to be creating. It's an interactive dashboard, and what we mean by interactive here is I'm going to apply filters. So in this case, I have the number of customers, a comparison of the year-to-date sales last year versus year-to-date, and I have different filters. I can filter the data by gender, I can filter the data by age group, and I can filter the data by state. And let me just show you briefly what happens here. If I click on Idaho, now I'm seeing just the data for Idaho. So I'm seeing the total sales of last year of 179,000, but with the filter applied, which in this case is Idaho, just 101. Now I can filter down even further. I can go to the males in Idaho, and I can go the 42 to 51-year-old males in Idaho. And again, our numbers change, just a very small amount of sales last year. All right, so I'll go ahead and reset my filters here. And we're back to where we were. Okay, so hang on, and we're going to go ahead and go through the steps to create an interactive dashboard, and then we'll show you step by step how to create an interactive dashboard. Let's begin by just going briefly over the steps involved in creating an interactive dashboard. Step number one is to get the data that you want to analyze using your dashboard. And of course, to format this correctly, it needs to be formatted as a database table in which we have column headings for the field names, and then all the data pertaining to one particular entity, or otherwise called a record, shows up on one row. And you see an example on the screen here of correctly formatted data that we will use to make our pivot table, our slicers, and finally our interactive dashboard. All right, after you have your data in a database table format, the next step is to create pivot tables. And you're going to create a pivot table for each area that you want to analyze on your dashboard. Now, we'll step through the process of creating a pivot table once we get into Excel. Right now, we're just, again, introducing you to the steps involved in creating an interactive dashboard. Step 3 in creating our interactive dashboard will be to create pivot charts. And you'll create pivot charts based on the pivot tables that you created in step 2. And again, we'll step through this here in just a second. Our fourth step in the 5-step process to create our interactive dashboard is to create slicers. Slicers will be the filters that we're going to use to analyze our data, and we'll see the data change each time we select a different filter with our slicer. And again, we'll go through this step by step in just a minute. And the last step, once we have the data, we have created pivot tables, pivot charts, and the slicers, is to put them all together in our interactive dashboard. And then we're going to dress it up and make it look nice. We're going to test it, and then from that point we'll be able to analyze our data using this interactive dynamic dashboard. All right, that first step that we just defined was to get the data, and I have the data. I have some customer data here. I actually have 421 records. And this is set up as a database table. I have a field name. The first row are the field names, or the column heading, so to speak. I have ID number, first initial, last name, address, city, state, zip, age, gender, the amount that they purchased last year, and how much they've purchased this year so far, and of course the last purchase date. Now, any of these that are categorical data, such as the city, the state, the zip, the age, the gender, and even the last purchase date, I can actually summarize by that or filter by that. For instance, I could filter by city, by state, by gender, by a specific zip code, or within a certain age range. And what I'm going to want to summarize on my dashboard is going to be the numeric data, which are the purchases. Okay, so I've got the data. It is set up so that I can make a pivot table from it. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and create a pivot table. Now, the first pivot table that I'm going to create is really not one that I'm ever going to filter on. I just want the total amounts, and I'm going to use these total amounts to compare my filter data. And you'll see what I'm talking about here when we actually create the dashboard here in just a second. But let's go ahead and create the first pivot table. So I go into Insert, I'm going to choose Pivot Table. It asks me, okay, what is the data that you want to use to create this pivot table? And it is using this sheet the customer data sheet from A1 to L422. That is correct. It says in this case, now where do you want the pivot table to be placed? Well, this first one is okay. I'm okay putting this on a new worksheet. If I were going to create additional pivot tables, I would want them to stay on that same worksheet, so I would use existing worksheet. I'm actually going to use a shortcut to create most of these pivot tables coming up here. So let's go ahead and click on new worksheet. Okay, we click OK, and there it is. So now this first pivot table, as I mentioned, all I wanted to do is just total up the last year purchases and the year-to-date purchases, and I'm going to use that to compare my filtered data, so I can compare the total to say just one particular state, one particular gender, or one particular gender and state. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in the last year purchases, and it automatically summarizes it or sums it for me. I also want to bring in the year-to-date purchases. Okay, now I'm going to use this pivot table actually as a copy for several others. We're going to have about 4 pivot tables when we're all done here to create our dashboard. But using the title that Excel gave me here, sum of last year purchases, sum of YTD purchases, that's a little awkward to show up on my dashboard, because remember, dashboards are pretty, they're summarized, and it's just a visual display of all my data in a way that I can easily understand. So I'm going to change the name here. I'm just going to go ahead and right click here, and I'll go ahead and choose value field settings here. Could also have double clicked on there, and I'm going to call this last year sales. Okay, last year sales. And that's just going to look a little bit better when I have it show up on my interactive dashboard. I'm going to go ahead and change the name of this one here. We're going to call this one, let's call it YTD sales here. Not YTD purchases, we'll call it YTD sales. All right, so there is my first pivot table. I have the numeric data formatted as currency. Excel did that for me in this particular version, which is nice. Now I'm going to use this pivot table as the basis for a couple of additional pivot tables. So I'll just go ahead and copy this information, go down a couple rows here, and paste. Now this next pivot table that I've created here, I want it to summarize by state and also by city. So I'll go ahead and bring in the state field. All right, so now it summarizes. It gives me a grand total for each, the last year sales and the year-to-date sales, but it also summarized or subtotaled by state. Well, I want to go a little further, so I want to bring in the city. We're actually going to use this particular pivot table for our pivot chart, so that we can actually graphically see the dollar amounts or the number of customers in each of these cities. Okay, we're in good shape so far here. We have 2 pivot tables. And again, just to show you how it could work within a pivot table here, I can filter down as I need to, but by adding slicers, as we'll get to here in just a second, it's just going to be a lot cooler way of doing things. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take this pivot table again. Whoops. And I'm going to copy it one more time. I'm going to put it over here somewhere here. All right, let's try putting it over here. Okay, this one, I'll go ahead and increase my row columns width here. This one, what I'd like it to do is do just by state for me, just only state. Okay, now the reason I'm having to do 2 of these, even though they're similar, is I'm going to create a pivot chart from this one that summarizes by state and city. And I don't want the cities to show up on another chart that I'm going to be working with here. Okay, so now I have my third pivot table. Okay, that summarizes again. We're just summarizing in this case by state. Here we have state and city, and this one, remember, is just the grand total altogether. Well, what I'd like to do now is for the pivot chart that I wanted to work with, where I have the cities and the states, rather than summarizing the dollar amounts, I'd actually like to have it give me a count. So we're going to modify this now that we have it. We really don't need as much data as we have here. So to remove a field from a pivot table, because really what I'm after here, I'm after a count. So let me just show you what I'm talking about here. I'm going to go ahead and right click on here, and I'm going to choose value field settings. I want it to summarize not a sum, but I'd like it to count. And as long as that's a numeric field, I'm okay with that. So let's go ahead and click OK here. All right, so now we have the count. So it tells us how many customers there are in Idaho, And really, I don't like the count of last year purchases. Let's just say in this case, number of customers. All right, makes a whole lot more sense now. Now the year-to-date sales I do not need. So to remove a field from the pivot table, I can either just turn it off with a checkbox here, which is kind of a cool way of doing it. I could also just drag it away if I didn't want it. Okay, so now that's why you can see that we've created one for the states that summarizes the dollar amounts. We have another one for state and city that just gives us the number. Finally, what I'd like to do is create one additional pivot table. This time what I want to do is I want to summarize the data by age group. So once again, I'll copy this down here. Okay, now I'd like to bring in the age. And I want the age. If I just click on age, what it tries to do is it tries to sum of the age, and that's not what I want. So I'll turn it off here. I really want it as a category. I want it as a row heading. So I'm going to take age and I'm going to drag it down into the rows. And so once I've done that now, you can see that instead of summarizing, it's not doing any math on age. It's actually subtotaling by age, which is really not helpful at all. It tells me so that for the customers that are 22 years old, that's the amount of year-to-date sales, that's the last year's sales. So what I want to do now is I want to group these. I want these in categories. And I'm just going to say, like, let's take people that are from 20 to 30 and so on. So I'm going to right-click on the first value here, and I'm going to choose group. That's the other cool thing about pivot tables. You very easily group here. So it says, okay, I'm going to start at, and it automatically gives me the lowest and the highest. Start at 22, end at 67, and group by 10. Well, that sounds like an okay thing. I could actually change this if I wanted to here, and I think I will. Just change this to 20 to 70. That'll make it look a little bit cleaner here. We'll go ahead and click OK, and there's my group. So between 20 and 29, these are the sales. Now, this isn't the number of customers that I have. This is the amount of sales. So I'm interested in filtering and comparing sales amounts for the states and also the age groups. And I'll also be able to do gender here as well. Okay, so now I have my pivot tables. And I'm just going to go ahead and change my sheet name down here, and let's just call it pivot tables. It's kind of obvious what it is, but just in case here. Okay, now that I have my pivot tables, I'm ready to go ahead and create a couple of pivot charts that'll be an integral part of my interactive dashboard. Well, the first pivot chart that I want to create is going to visually show me the sales based on each state. So because I'm going to use this particular pivot table, I want a pivot chart for states. I'm going to move into this particular pivot table, and I'm going to go ahead and go into the insert again, and I'm going to choose pivot chart. All right, I am happy now with the clustered column chart. The default type here is going to be perfect for what I'm looking for here, because I want to compare all the different states in a visual manner. So I'll go ahead and click OK here, and we'll dress this up and we'll make it a little bit bigger when we move it over into the dynamic dashboard. Okay, so now we can see last year's sales and year-to-date sales, and we can see them compared for each particular city. Now, the field buttons allow me to filter on the pivot chart itself. I don't need to do this because I'm going to be using my slicers that I'm about to create. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the pivot table analyze here tab, and I'm going to turn off the field button. So I go to field buttons, and I'm just going to go ahead and choose hide all. All right, that's a little cleaner chart. And again, we're going to add this to our dashboard here in just a second. To make it look a little bit better though, and to let it fit on one page, I'm going to change the legend. Right now the legend is over on the right side. I'd really rather have it over below the actual state. So I'll go to design here, and I'm going to go to add chart element, and I'm going to go to legend, and we'll go to more options if we wanted to, but right there's the bottom, and that's going to work perfectly for me here. So I'll change the legend to the bottom. Okay, and in just a minute we're going to create a new sheet, and we're going to take this chart over onto our interactive dashboard. I want to create one more pivot chart right now, which is going to count the customers based on the state and the city. So I'm going to move into that particular pivot table. Once again, I'll go into Insert, and I'll go ahead and choose Pivot Table, Pivot Chart. Okay, there we are. And this time I'd like a bar chart. Okay, so that looks fine for what I'm looking for here. I'll go ahead and click OK, and now I have a bar chart that displays the number of customers in each of the particular cities and summarizes by state. I'm going to turn off my field buttons again, and again I'll make this look a little bit better when I finally put this in my dynamic dashboard sheet. Well, speaking of the dynamic dashboard, it's time to go ahead and create it. And I'll move the charts over, and then I'll go ahead and create my slicer. So I'm going to create a new sheet here. I want the dashboard to be the first thing I see. So I'm going to, after I created sheet 4, I'm going to drag it over so it's the first chart, and we'll call this dashboard. Okay. Well, I'm going to go back to the pivot tables now, and I'm going to go ahead and take my first chart, and I'm going to cut it, bring it over into the dashboard area, and I'm going to paste it. Okay, we'll rearrange these as we go, and I'm going to do the same thing now for my number of customers. Move that, paste it into the dashboard. So we're getting there here. Okay. Just to give me some more area here, I'm going to turn off my fields here. I don't need the fields for my dashboard. I'm going to bring it in, make it a little bit larger. Also going to change my title. We're going to call this number of customers. And I need to add a title to this one as well. So we'll go to Design, Add Chart Element, and we will add the chart title here. And we'll put it above the chart. Double click in here, and we're going to call this year to date. Last year sales. Okay, so now when I'm looking at this chart, I know what they are, and again we'll size them up when we get all the other information in here as well. Okay, so I would like to just format these, just again, we want this to look nice, so I went into the design and I just chose style number 4. We'll go ahead and make it consistent for both. We'll choose style number 4 for this one as well. One other thing I see here, I don't really want this total here. I don't even want it at all, so I'm just going to click on it, hit the delete key, and now the legend is gone. Okay, we're getting close here. We're getting close to what we need. So I'm going to go back to pivot tables, and the next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to create some slicers. The slicers are going to be the filters that I'm going to be working with. And I'm going to create a slicer or a filter for state. I'm going to create a filter for gender, and I'm going to create a filter for age range. So I'm going to move into first this number of customers pivot table. And I can just go ahead and go into the Insert menu, and I can choose Slicer from here. You will can also find that in the Pivot Table Analyze tab. So Slicer. Okay, so I would like this one to start to be by state. So I'll click on State. Okay, so now I have a slicer for state. And here's the cool thing about this. Because I kind of copied all of these based on one particular pivot chart to start with. If I click on Nevada, notice what happened here. With the exception of the first pivot table. Okay, notice that is changing. Okay, for that second pivot table here. Now, I would like to be able to have this slicer apply to this pivot table and also the age pivot table. So for instance, if I choose Idaho, I would like it to show me only Idaho on this pivot table, that is counting the number of customers, but also this pivot table that is summarizing the sales, and also this one by age. So I'm going to do that by going back into the Slicer tab, and I'm going to click on this Report Conditions tool. And the Report Conditions tool now allows me to specify which pivot tables I want this slicer to apply to. And so I have pivot table 3, pivot table 4, pivot table 5. I'm going to cancel here for just a second. I just want to show you how you can know what pivot table number you're looking at here. If you click on a particular pivot table and you go into the pivot table analyze, it will give you the pivot table name right up here. So pivot table 5. The one I do not want this one to be added to is pivot table 3. So I can pretty much turn all of them on with the exception of pivot table 3. So I'm going to turn off all the filters. I'm going to go back here into the click on the slicer and choose the report connections, and I'm going to click on each of the pivot tables here, the other 3 pivot tables. Okay, now what happens here is when I click on Idaho or Nevada, all 3 of those additional pivot tables are filtered by this one slicer. Okay, I want to add now another slicer for gender. So I'll go ahead and move into the same table that I was in. I'll go into Insert. I will choose Slicer. This time I want to create a slicer for gender. Okay, we'll shrink it a little bit here. Okay, now if I click on it, notice again it's only applicable to the table that I used or that I was located in when I created this slicer. So I'm going to do the same thing, go to Report Connections and turn on all of them. Except the first one. So now if I click female, I get just the values for females. And again, because I have 2 slicers now, I can go to Idaho and I can choose female, and I have the values for just females in Idaho. Okay, we need to now go ahead and add a slicer for the age range. So this time I'm going to go into age range, so it'll understand the ages that I'm working with here. I'm going to go back into Insert one more time. I'm going to choose Slicer, and I want age. And there we go. Because I was in that particular table, it says, okay, I think this is what he wants. Well, just like I did, I'm going to have to tell this particular slicer what pivot tables to work with. So I'll go back into Report Connections, and I'm going to turn on the other 2. Again, I do not want to filter the first table. Okay, so now I'm going to reset state, reset gender, and now I can filter by age and by state and by gender. All right, so those are the slicers. We'll be adding these now to our dynamic dashboard. So I'm going to go ahead and take all 3 of these, use the control key to select them. I'm going to cut all 3, going to paste them into the dashboard. Okay, I would like the state to be the first filter. I want gender to be the second filter, at least in the location, and I want age to be the third. So we're getting there. We're actually getting here. Watch what happens though as far as the pivot charts, because they were made on a pivot table that this slicer works with. The pivot charts also display the information based on the slicer. Okay, really what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put in some summary data. I'm going to dress this up a little bit here. So I'm going to go ahead and just for fun, let's close this. Let's go ahead and put in a title here. I'm just going to go over here to Y. I'm going to do a merge and center. I'm going to change my font size to about, let's just go 36. And we'll just type sales dashboard here. Okay, we're getting there. Now, I would like just kind of a row around here just to kind of dress it up a little bit. And again, you know, we'll get there. We're working on this a little bit step by step here. I'm going to go ahead and choose outside borders. And I'm also going to add some shading in here for the background there, just to kind of Okay, and let's go ahead and shrink this column a little bit here. Okay, we can rearrange this one now. Rearrange this one. Whoops. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, now what I'd like to do is I would like to add my summary data that will allow me to compare just the amounts in a percent. So I'm going to go ahead and type in here. I'm going to do a merge and center right in here. And I'm going to type sales last year. And I'm going to go ahead and boldface this. And let's make it a little bit larger as well here. Okay. Now what I want right here is going to be the amount of sales, the total sales that is filtered. So in this case I want filtered. And this is going to be the grand total. And this is going to be the percentage. Let's go ahead and make that a little larger as well. And boldface it. Perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to take the value let's just start with a total. I want the grand total for the sales last year here, and then I'll put a percentage in here. So I'm going to go ahead and start with an equals, and I'm pointing to a value on another worksheet. So I go to the pivot table, and I'm looking for the grand total for the sales last year. So there's the grand total for the sales last year. I'll press enter, and there I have it. Again, I'm going to go ahead and change the font so that it is also bold-faced. I'm going to format it as currency so it looks a little bit better than what we have here. All right, now the filtered amount. Again, if I click on Idaho, I want to see what the sales last year were for Idaho. So I'm going to go into my start my formula with an equals again. I'm going to go to the pivot tables, and I'm looking for the grand total of last year's sales. Okay, it's the same number now. Just use my format painter here. Perfect. Now I want a percentage. So I'll go ahead and divide the filtered amount by the total amount. And of course I'm going to end up with 100% because there's no filter here. And again, let's go ahead and boldface that. Well, let's go ahead and apply a filter and see what happens here. So let's click on Nevada. So I click on Nevada, and so my filtered amount, and notice how my amount of customers changed. My year-to-date sales chart changed as well, and so I have the year-to-date total was 179,000, but the sales last year, excuse me, not year-to-date, but the sales last year for Nevada is 37,000. Okay, I want to do the same thing now for the year-to-date sales. So I'll go ahead and type year-to-date sales here. And I'm going to use the format painter and just make that look the same. Perfect. Okay, we'll go ahead and make that a little larger too. Okay, so we'll type in filtered here, and total, and percent filtered. Want to boldface all of these. Helps if you hit the right keys there. Okay, now I want the total for the year-to-date sales. So I'll do equals. I'll go into the pivot tables, and the total for the year-to-date, again, this is the unfiltered one. Let's put that in the wrong spot, sorry. Okay, then I want the filtered one. Equals, pivot tables, and the filtered for the year-to-date sales will be here. Okay, then I want the percentage. I'm lazy, I'll just copy this one. Okay, perfect. Let's format these as currency. Again, I have 100%. Let's boldface them too. Okay, we're getting just about there. Okay, let's click on Idaho. Notice what happened when we clicked on Idaho. Our sales year to date changed as well as our sales last year changed. And I'm just looking at just Idaho sales. So right now, it looks like I'm doing a little bit better in Idaho this year than I did last year. Well, again, we wanted to make this pretty. So I'm going to go ahead and add a shape here just for fun. We'll go ahead and click on shapes and let's just insert a shape here. Now, one of the problems we have with inserting shapes is that. So I'm going to change the shape fill. I'm going to say, no, don't fill it. So all I have now is just the line. I'll go ahead and copy that. We'll put this over here. Okay, and for a short video, we're pretty much done. Let me go ahead and show you what we've got here now. Okay, so I reset my filters, and so now I see the data unfiltered at all. I see the number of customers for each state, and then each city within each of those states. I'm just going to adjust it a little bit here, just trying to make it prettier as I go here, and when I have my finished product, then I'm happy here. Okay, so if I want to see just Oregon, I click on Oregon. Everything changes. It's an interactive dashboard. If I want to see, leave Oregon as it is, and I want to see the age group of 40 to 49 within Oregon, I click on that, and now my sales change. And again, notice that the total for the year to date and the sales last year did not change. Number of customers, looks like I only have one city in Oregon. Okay, I can go further as well. I can filter this down into females. So now I only have one, one female customer who is between 40 and 49 in the state of Oregon. All right, I'm going to reset the gender, reset the state, the age, and just to show you, if you've probably worked with slicers before, but if I want multiple states, I can just use the control key here, and I can choose, in this case, both Idaho and Oregon. Okay, there you have it. It is that easy to create an interactive dashboard. Remember, go through the 5 steps. Get your data in the right format, create the pivot tables, create the pivot charts, create the slicers, and then make it pretty. And of course, when you have more time, when you're not trying to put together a real quick video, you can then dress this up and make it quite impressive. All right, you'll find step-by-step instructions to create pivot tables and other things on my website, luthermaddy.com. If you like this video, please consider liking it. Please consider subscribing. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next video.